Hi, I'm Jamie from Stonemaier Games, and today I'm going to talk about guilty pleasure games. A topic that I didn't plan on covering when someone initially asked me about it. Someone asked me in the comments one day, what are some of your guilty pleasure games? And I couldn't really think of any because I don't feel guilty about playing games, and I play a wide variety of games with a wide variety of people, and I love that. I love being what they call an omni gamer, someone who's open to playing pretty much anything. And I am. I'm open to playing pretty much anything at least one time. I'll give it a try, and I don't feel guilty about that. I also don't feel guilty about playing a game that I've played a dozen times. I love playing games. It's a huge part of my life, my hobby, my work, and my relationships with friends, family, and my partner. Um, so, but then I asked this question on a live cast to get people's thoughts, and people started mentioning some interesting categories. And I was like, there are some categories of games where I feel a little guilty about, often about suggesting these games. But once they're on the table, I'm not feeling guilty about them being on the table. And so I wanted to run down some of those categories today to see what you think, to see if you have any games that fit into these categories. I don't know I don't know if this category of video has much utility to game designers, but it was a fun one to make. And I think sometimes it's fun just to make a video because it's fun to talk about topics like this. So let's see. There's a lot to cover today. I'm going to jump around a little bit. I wanted to start out with a few categories where I don't have specific examples. I have another maybe 10 or so categories where I have specific examples of kind of one of my top examples, favorite games within that category. But a few categories I couldn't think of any. So one is games that I always win. Some people mention this as a category, and I agree. If there was a game that I almost always won and that my friends did not have a chance or had very little chance at winning, I would probably feel a little guilty about suggesting those games. However, I'm not that good of a gamer, so I don't have any games like that came to mind. Really expensive games. All these are categories suggested by other people. I don't think I thought of any of these originally, so I won't repeat that. But yeah, expensive games. I don't have any games in my collection other than games that we've produced at Stonemaier Games. But even those, we do have some pretty expensive games. But there are some, I would say any game that's over $150 is a really, really expensive game, in my opinion. And that includes games that you maybe have blinged out. You've added a lot of different accessories to carry maybe an original cost of under $150 well above $150. So I don't have any games like that in my collection, but I can understand someone feeling a little guilty about that, even as they are having fun making a game they love better and better by those accessories or by spending that much money out of pocket on a new game. A game where I can definitely relate to this, but I couldn't think of a specific example. A game where you don't know the rules, but everyone else at the table knows the rules. You've probably sat down at the table to some of these games where especially the longer games, the longer to teach games, where you're like, okay, I really want to play this, but everyone else already knows how to play. Are you all okay with me playing anyway? I always feel a little bit of guilt when I do that, and I try to be flexible with the rules. I try to ensure when that happens that they aren't having to explain every single rule in the game to me, that we can just kind of start playing and I'll figure it out as we go, as long as there's someone to guide me a little bit as we play. Games with a very different demographic than me. So specifically, when someone mentioned this, I thought of like kids games. So a game that is maybe geared towards kids. The game that I often think about for this is Animal Upon Animal. I might feel a little guilty, a little bit weird about bringing that game at game night. I love Animal Upon Animal. So I can kind of see that category. I don't feel, as long as I know that I will have fun with the game, I don't really feel all that guilty about it, but I can see how some people might. Games with controversial themes or creators. I can definitely see this happening where there is maybe a theme or a creator where you just feel a little guilty, but a little icky about getting to the table, but you also love the game's mechanisms. I think that's a tough push-pull. I think that an example outside gaming would be if you love a show or a movie with an actor who has turned out to be a fairly terrible person, but you still really love that show or movie. But you still feel a little bit guilty about suggesting it, and certainly guilty maybe for the games about posting about it on social media because it might represent something else that you don't mean to be representing. I could definitely see a little guilt associated with that. For me, long games, a couple of people mentioned this about really, really long games, because there's maybe the thought in your head that you could be playing more games within that time. If you're playing a 5-hour game, you could be playing 5 1-hour games instead. Or you could be spending that time on something else. I couldn't think of any in particular, partially because I don't gravitate towards many long games. When I do play a long game, it's very intentional. I am blocking off that time to play that long game. I don't really feel guilty about it, but I can see that. Like if someone's spending a whole day playing something where they could be spending that day doing a lot of other things or playing a lot of different games, I can see a little bit of guilt associated with that. And last, games that I created. I always feel a little guilty. In fact, I generally avoid suggesting one of my games, one of the games that we published as Stonemaier games or that I've designed as Stonemaier games. I feel a little, I avoid suggesting them for game night. I wait for other people to say, hey, I've really been wanting to play viticulture. I've really been wanting to play apiary before. I wait for them to do that rather than me saying it because I feel a little guilty about doing it. I probably should not feel guilty about that. There's really no shame in me wanting to play a game that I love, but I don't want anyone to feel pressured into playing any of the games that I've designed because there are so many other games out there that I designed or developed that I worked on. Anyway, those are the categories where I couldn't really think of any specific examples. The other categories I can, and here is the first one. I'll pull up, finally, you can stop looking at just me and you can look at the other screen over here. So the first category are games that you really like, but no one else in your group or your partner suggests this game. Like no one else is actively asking for this game. And it's really not a knock on the game itself. It's just personal preference. There's probably a game that you have like this. And for me, the one that came to mind is Hierarchy. I really love this little 2-player card game. And I've found other people that like it too, but people aren't actively asking to play it. But I would always gladly play Hierarchy when I have someone else who really is eager to play it. And it helps that it's a really short game. So this is one that came to mind when I thought of games that I really get excited about playing, but that I don't see as many other people in my group, my particular group, getting excited about playing it. Part of that might be also that it is a 2-player game. And so for 2-player games, you really need your primary 2-player partner to be excited about the game. So that is, games that I really like, but that others in my group or your partner don't get as excited about. And for me, that's Hierarchy. The next category are games with player elimination. I certainly, when I'm playing a game, one of my main goals is that everyone at the table is having a good time. I want to have fun with my friends. I want my friends to be having fun with me. And so if there's the possibility that someone could either be actually eliminated from the game or essentially eliminated from the game, that to me rarely is fun. And so I always feel maybe a little guilty about doing that. I feel a lot less guilty about it in a 2-player only game where that is the object of the game, to say reduce the opponent's life to 0. But in a multiplayer game with 3+ players, it feels a little different. That said, I love Blockus. I really love. In fact, I thought of Blockus for multiple categories on this list. It's an older game. It's a game with player elimination. In Blockus, you are placing these polyomino pieces, so they're touching only the corners of your pieces. And in doing so, you're trying to block off areas so other players can't place their pieces. And whenever a turn comes where you can't place a piece, your game is over. And so you are actively knocking other people out of the game while trying to outlast the other players yourself. I love this game. I think it's a fantastic game. It is really easy to teach, really easy to play. It is a great puzzle from the moment you start placing pieces, but it does involve player elimination. So I always do feel just a little guilty about eliminating another player. Fortunately, they don't have to sit around for long after they have been eliminated in the game of Blockus. So that is player elimination. My pick for that category is Blockus. The next game are loud games. The next category are loud games. So have you ever been at a game night where you have a couple tables set up and a couple of the tables are really quiet and intensely looking at the game, and then there's one really loud table, and sometimes you're at that table and maybe you feel a little guilty that you are being so loud when the other games are requiring a lot more focus and are a lot quieter. I certainly do. At the same time, I'm having fun. Usually if it's a loud game, we are having a different type of fun than games where you're thinking through your creative moves and your strategies and optimization. That's a different type of fun. But in a game like Skull, that's the photo that I'm showing you here. Skull is typically a fairly loud game. I have a blast playing Skull, but if I am going to play it, I typically try to not play it right next to a game where a different type of quieter fun is happening. I don't feel guilty about suggesting Skull. I think I would only feel guilty about it if there was the risk of being disruptive to a much quieter game nearby. So that's loud games. My pick for this is Skull. Oh, and just, I guess, a brief amount of information about Skull is each player has 4 of these tiles. They look like coasters. 4 of these tiles. One of them has a skull on it. The other 3 have flowers on it. And you are stacking a few of these tiles and putting them in front of you. And then you are deciding, you're kind of bidding to decide how many tiles you can flip at the table until without revealing a skull. There's this bidding system, and you end up eliminating some tiles. And actually, this game has player elimination too. You can be completely eliminated from skull if you run out of tiles. But yeah, Skull, wonderful, loud game. The next category is games with content you've never tried. I have another similar category coming up soon. But so this is Glenmore 2, a game that I truly love. I think Glenmore 2 is a brilliant game with one of the core mechanisms. Actually, it has a lot of mechanisms that I really love. One of them being there's a one-way action selection track. Another one is that you are placing a tile and activating all the benefits on that tile and all the way around that tile. It feels really good whenever you place a tile in Glenmore. But in Glenmore 2 Chronicles, the game came with a lot of modules. I think 10 plus modules in the game. And then the expansion came with even more modules. And I had a sense of guilt that I had all these modules that I was never playing in a game that I knew that I loved. So content in a game that you own, that you've just never tried, even though you love the game. And that is the case with Glenmore 2. So do I need to feel guilty about that? No. Do I feel a little bit guilty about that? Yes, I do. I'll get to a similar category in a second. In fact, why don't I skip to this? Well, no, I don't want to skip around. The next category that I have are digital and mobile games. And this is Slay the Spire here. One of the digital games that I've gone back to over and over again. It is really satisfying to play Slay the Spire. This is the digital version of Slay the Spire. It's a deck building game, a one-player deck building game where you're trying to reach the top of the spire and defeat a number of various enemies along the way and crafting your deck along the way. It's a wonderful game. I generally feel a little guilty about playing digital games. This is a me thing where when I'm playing a digital game, I generally feel that I should be spending that time for something more productive. Again, this is totally me because I think part of it is that one of the reasons that I play games is to learn from those games and let them impact my designs. And when I'm playing a digital game, I can play it for maybe an hour or so for the first time and get that feeling from it. I can understand many of the core mechanisms of the game and how they might impact a tabletop design, but I don't really need to play longer than that. Sometimes I want to play longer than that, but I don't really need to. So oftentimes I have to give myself permission to do it. I have to say, Jamie, it's okay. You don't have to be productive right now. You can just enjoy this game. I think the other reason that it's a little bit different than a tabletop game is that I'm not playing with other people when I'm playing Slay the Spire, for example. And so I'm not having that group. I'm not having quality social time with the people I care about when I'm playing a game like Slay the Spire. So completely unwarranted, but I do feel a little guilty whenever I spend time playing a digital game that I have already played, that I already know fairly well. And Slay the Spire is my pick for that. So back to a similar category to content that I haven't tried are games that I own, but I've never played. These are games on my shelf of opportunity. I don't think there's any shame in having these games on the shelf. I'm glad that I own the game Firefly, but I have never played it. I've actually set up the game Firefly, which took quite some time. I learned it, and then we didn't actually get to play it, which was a little disheartening. And so now I need to find a time with someone ideally who knows how to play to get it to the table, because I'm very curious about playing the game. I do like the theme. I like the show. So this is one where I feel a little guilty about, because it's one of these. I play a lot of games on my shelf for opportunity. It is not a big shelf. There are only a few games on it at any given time. I work through them pretty well. But when a game lingers there, I notice it. And I start to feel a little guilty that I'm passing over this game to play other games instead. There's a little bit of guilt associated with that. So games that I own that I've never played on my shelf of opportunity, Firefly is the example of this. One category that a lot of people mentioned is money sinks, games where you can spend a lot of money into it. And I guess I kind of covered this a little bit with really expensive games, or games with either a flat out cost to get into the game in the first place, or games with lots of accessories, expansions that you've spent a lot on. But Magic the Gathering is a game that a lot of people have sunk a lot of money into. To be competitive in Magic the Gathering, you often need to spend a lot of money. However, you can have a lot of fun playing Magic the Gathering, as I have found, and I don't feel guilty about this, by playing it in other ways, by not trying to play it competitively, by just playing it like any other game, just play it for fun. And the way I do this is that whenever a new set comes out, I consider buying a draft set so I can just play a draft with friends, and that's it. And then I have some cards left over if I want to do more with that, but I don't have to. It's essentially the cost of buying a pretty nice board game for the cost of doing that draft. But I do get why a number of people mention this category of feeling guilty about spending money on an ongoing basis on a collectible card game, a trading card game, or a living card game. Any sort of expandable card game where you end up spending a lot of money on an ongoing basis. I can see there's can be some guilt associated with that. The next category is a game where some people think the game is broken. So this came up recently where a few people told me that they think the game Forest Shuffle is broken. I don't feel that way about the game. I found in my games of Forest Shuffle that a vast variety of strategies win the game. And I think the game gives players through the Forest Row a number of opportunities to play a variety of cards. Some of the cards are more balanced than others, but that's the thrill of the game, that you get some of these games, you go deep into a strategy, you get more points from it, from going deep. Maybe you try to go deep, but you don't get the cards because they don't come up in the draw, they don't come up in the card row, and you don't get to fully optimize that strategy. I love Forest Shuffle. So I use broken in quotes. Like I think there probably are some strategies in Forest Shuffle that are a little stronger than others if you can make them happen. But that never really stops me from enjoying a game. So really, this isn't a category that I actually feel guilty about. I never feel guilty about bringing Forest Shuffle to the table. But I do understand that some people might feel guilty about playing a game that they perceive as broken, especially if they can't help themselves of going into the broken strategy in the game. I think it takes just a tiny bit of self-control not to do that. But I understand that some people might feel differently. So broken games, I don't actually feel that Forest Shuffle is broken. I love it, but I can see how some people might feel a little guilty about playing a game that they perceive as broken or that they've heard is broken. Next category is classic games that are a little older, a little dated, maybe a little outdated, but I still love them. And I have a couple games on this list. Blockist came to mind, Catan came to mind, any game with a deck of cards came to mind. But at the top of the list for me is Scotland Yard. I really love Scotland Yard. I think it is the most brilliantly streamlined hidden movement game where one player is playing as Mr. or Mrs. X. They are hiding somewhere on the board. They're moving around, and all the other players are working together to try to find Mr. or Mrs. X on the board somewhere. I love the game. I still have it in my collection. I have it. I think my copy is 30 years old at this point, maybe 35 years old at this point. It's a really old copy, but it still plays wonderfully. I do feel a little guilty about bringing this ancient game out to the table. That is where my guilt comes from with this game. Not that I love this game, not that it is an older game, but just I think because it is so much older, bringing it to the table sometimes feels a little weird next to all these brand new games that are, a little bit more modern in their design. So I think that's where the guilt comes from a little bit, but I still love it. I'm still happy to get it to the table. I do suggest it from time to time, and I don't really feel guilty when I do. The next category are sneaky and deceptive games. These are games where I often walk away from the game feeling a little guilty that I was sneaky or deceptive. Sunday Split came to mind. It's a game where you're putting some things face down. And in this I Cut You Choose game, Dune Imperium, though, has lots of opportunities for being sneaky or a little deceptive, and especially in combat. In combat, where you can play these intrigue cards that completely reshape the form of combat. I love that I get to feel sneaky in Dune Imperium. And I love that even players can opt out of feeling sneaky. If they don't want to feel sneaky, they don't have to draw intrigue cards at all. But I often do. I really like that element of the game. But I do often walk away feeling just a little bit guilty after I have taken what was perfect information for the players, and I use this hidden information and used it to my advantage in the game. So I love these games. I think games are a great place to be a little sneaky in the context of the game, and then walk away and not be sneaky and deceptive in real life. I think that games provide a nice playground for doing that. But yeah, I often feel a little guilty doing those sneaky things, even in games. So this is a category that I didn't really think of for the list, but a number of people suggested this specific game for it, Love Letter, for the category of simple games. a lot of people apparently feel guilty playing a simple game when there are many more complex games that you could get to the table. Uh, I I don't think I feel guilty about this, but it was interesting to see so many people say it and suggest it, and specifically mention Love Letter as their game that they felt a little guilty about. I love Love Letter. I think it's a great game. I wouldn't say I get it to the table all that often, but when I do, I'm having a blast with it. And especially, this is the version that I have, the Hobbit version of Love Letter. A couple other people also mentioned the game Can't Stop, a game that I also really love and I'm always glad to play. So I found that interesting. I was wondering if you can relate to that. If maybe there's some sort of guilt associated with playing a simple game opposed to a more complex game. And the last category are naughty games, games with a little bit of a naughty adult theme to them. Or there might be a little bit of guilt in playing them. So the game that I mentioned here is Telestrations After Dark, where I actually have not played this specific version of Telestrations, but anytime I play Telestrations, it ends up being a naughty game of Telestrations. That ends up inevitably happening unless we're playing with kids. I don't really feel guilty about it. I think I would feel a little guilty about having Telestrations After Dark on my shelf, but I don't feel guilty about having Telestrations on my shelf, the normal version, even though I know it will turn naughty when we actually play. So I think maybe there's a little bit of a stigma of having a naughty game on your shelf. There doesn't need to be at all. I don't think there needs to be at all, but I can understand a little bit of the guilt that might come with that. But yeah, I think games are another great place to feel a little naughty in your life if you are looking for that outlet. And I love playing Telestrations for that reason. I love that it always does turn a little bit naughty when we play. So yeah, that is my list of games where I might feel a little guilt suggesting them, or a little guilt having them on my shelf and not playing them, a little guilt after I played if I felt a little sneaky or if I eliminated someone in that game. But it's just a little bit. These aren't. I think that going through this list, I think that the utility of this is examining the idea that even though this might be an actual feeling that you have or that I have, that I might actually feel a little guilty, that I don't need to be weighed down by it, and I can still find the fun in it, and it doesn't need to be it doesn't need to be a burden or an element of shame to have a game in any of these categories. I think all these are okay, and that is also okay to feel a little guilty. It's okay to feel that way and examine that feeling and move forward with that feeling, move past that feeling, and actually play these games that you enjoy and that you have fun with. That's my takeaway for this. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you have any guilty pleasure games in these categories or in other categories, let me know about that in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic. Thanks.